everybody, and welcome back to the Sunshine State Rails. Where am I off to at 3:02 in the morning? Well, we're taking a little bit of a venture beyond the Sunshine State this morning. Got a little bit of a word that Norfolk Southern train 29F is going to have a little something special on it this morning. Earlier this year, Norfolk Southern has started revitalizing some of their heritage locomotives in their 20-unit fleet. One of those being number 1069, the Virginian. And that locomotive is evidently leading this morning's 29F bound for Baldwin Yard in Jacksonville. The 1069. That, for whatever reason that I can't explain, is my favorite heritage locomotive that Norfolk Southern has, and it's made it on to 29F, which is hotshot container and UPS traffic for Baldwin Yard in Jacksonville. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm making a beeline for the state line. So I've got a few hours to go, so we're just gonna sit back and enjoy the ride.
By 5:15, I was off Interstate 75 at Lake City, now following US 441 towards Fargo, crossing under I-10, and this was our gateway to the land of everything and nothing. After the junction of Interstate 10, US 441 turns into one of those Georgia-Florida two-lane highways through nothing but pine trees, and at 5:15 a.m., there's just about nothing out here but total darkness. And that's just about all there was to see or not see all the way. At about 10 to 6, I'd passed the Peach sign and jumped borders into Georgia, and that let me know that there were only about 20 minutes left to destination.
Alright everybody, welcome back. It's now 6:15 a.m. and we have made it after about 4 hours on the road to Fargo, Georgia. We're now on the Norfolk Southern's GS&F Valdosta district, and this will be our campsite, so to speak, until the 29F shows up. And it's pretty quiet, but what I will say is I am incredibly surprised by how much cooler it is up here. I mean, it's mid-September, but go ahead and take a look at this. 62 degrees in Fargo, as opposed to where I'd be otherwise, we'll say Parish, 74. And keep in mind, the sun hasn't even come up yet. Sunrise is a bit later here. The sun comes up in about, well, no, it's actually the same time in both places. Sun comes up in about an hour, and there's a 12-degree difference between where I basically just came from and where I'm at now. So that's pretty impressive, and it feels so much nicer outside. I'll definitely say that, but I'm gonna relax for a little bit. I've been on the road a while, and I've got a little while to wait for this train, so we'll go from there when we hear something else.
While I personally had never been to Fargo before, I can't imagine many other people who aren't in search of trains have been either. There's really not a whole lot to Fargo beyond the 2 or 3 gas stations that reside within a mile of road, the questionable cafe about halfway through town, the Dollar General that can be found in just about every American town nowadays, and of course some miscellaneous homes, but Fargo really is just a set of clearings between nothing but pine forests, that which we drove through about 40 minutes of to get here. And once the sun actually did come up, I decided to drive a little bit north of town and do a little bit of exploring and possibly find some other spots along the line to get our train. And a half mile up the road and we're back into the pine forests. Some of it has been cleared for forestry reasons, but otherwise it is still nothing but pine trees. There is a neat water tower just outside of the town limits, though. Afterwards, I drove down one of the few dirt roads that cut off of the main road that led back down to the Norfolk Southern siding that starts down in Fargo where we were sitting earlier. This siding is about 10,500 feet long, and the south end is at Control Point Fargo, and I believe the north end is called Sawgrass. We're about halfway between Valdosta and Jacksonville on the Norfolk Southern's GS&F, and 29F was supposed to get here around this time in the morning. But a little bit of friendly news from up the road would change those plans very quickly.
Alright, so my story is, I've just been railroaded. So, it's 9 o'clock, and I've just heard from a friend of mine who lives in Valdosta that, unbeknownst to me, 29F and what I believe to be the other Jacksonville-bound intermodal train from Atlanta, 28J, those two swap engine power in Atlanta, Georgia before they make their way to Jacksonville. I did not know that until I was sitting in Fargo, Georgia at about 8:30 in the morning, and so now it's become evident that the Virginian will not be making a trip to Jacksonville today, and I am now stranded in Georgia with nothing to do. So, now, had I known about that before I had made the 4-hour drive to Georgia this morning, I probably could have saved myself a whole lot of time and perhaps heartache, if you want to say that, but the reality of it is, I'm here. So, we might as well find something else to try and see. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to follow the GS&F down to Crawford. I'm on the Georgia 94. I'm just going to follow it into Crawford where it meets with the CSX Callahan subdivision. And 29F with their new and arguably less interesting power set is still on the way, so we can see them in Crawford where they cross the CSX, and obviously we can also see some CSX action there or around Baldwin. And I'm probably going to follow the S-line home, so might be able to see some stuff along that too, but we'll just see what we can make of today now.
So it was 45 minutes south and east on the Georgia 94 headed back towards the Sunshine State, and while rather disappointing, it wasn't the worst thing in the world to happen because there'll be plenty more options for food where I was headed. There was just about nothing to eat in Fargo. The multi-state 2-lane highway would eventually bring me into Crawford, the crossing of the CSX Callahan subdivision with the Norfolk Southern's GS&F Valdosta district. Double-tracked nearly a decade ago, the CSX Callahan subdivision is the line that turns south out of the Callahan Junction, running south for direct access into Baldwin. This is the route that most trains will take that are en route for Tampa or points south. The majority of Norfolk Southern trains crossing at Crawford are trains bound to or from the Florida East Coast Railway. While there's a handful of industries that Norfolk Southern does serve in the Jacksonville area, CSX has the major stakes in most of the industries and intermodal businesses around Jacksonville. So quantitatively, you're going to see a lot more CSX trains at Crawford than you will Norfolk Southern. Unless, of course, you time it just right like I did. I was at Crawford for about 15 minutes before 29F finally caught up to me. Although, thanks to the folks in Atlanta, Georgia, there is no freshly painted Virginian to be found here, 29F is still carrying their hotshot containers and UPS trailers bound for Jacksonville. Though, let's remember, they're not bound for Jacksonville, they're actually bound for somewhere closer to Miami, because this stuff is all going to be transferred to the Florida East Coast Railway, and will take one of their trains down to the very bottom of the state. Again, most if not all of Norfolk Southern's long-distance trains to and from Jacksonville are for the Florida East Coast. And although we may argue that it may not look as pretty or be as interesting, it's still a hot train.
Norfolk Southern, dial code 242.0, no defect.
In another 5 minutes, one of the signals on the southbound CSX side comes up to an approach. Proceed prepared to stop at the next signal ahead. This meant that we now had a southbound train coming towards us on the CSX side. Although Norfolk Southern also had a train coming out of Jacksonville waiting to head west across the Diamonds too. Train number 330 was sitting in the Crawford siding waiting on 29F to get by, and now they'd have to wait on the southbound CSX train. The opposing train in question would be southbound M441, manifest freight bound for Baldwin Yard in Tampa. This is a train that's made plenty of appearances in recent videos of mine. They're now leaving Waycross in the early to mid mornings, putting them here through Crawford right around noon, and on the right days they can even be a daylight evening run into Tampa. .441's the Tampa Commerce train, so just about anything bound for that city and its surrounding cities could be found on this train. Aggregate rock, lumber, general freight, various chemicals, building materials, you name it, it's probably on here. Though he may have some additional stuff on the train, especially north of Baldwin, because they will work Baldwin Yard and Wildwood Yard before finally running to Tampa, so they could bring things from Waycross that are headed to either of those two prior yards. And they tend to spend a pretty good chunk of time in Baldwin both changing crews and working the yard afterwards, so that often decides when they'll eventually get to Tampa that day. Since that approach indication they got here at the Diamond, 441 has obviously had a signal aspect improvement somewhere down the line, perhaps at the distance signal to Bryceville, because they picked up a lot of speed over this Diamond. But now, to top it all off, it was the very short NS330's turn, taking off from Crawford with two AC-44 C6M rebuilds for power, pulling a short train of miscellaneous freight off the Florida East Coast, headed back to Norfolk Southern's Baldwin Yard in Macon, Georgia.
Alright, well, here we are after the little action there at Crawford. It's about 11:30 now and we're in Baldwin. Just figured I'd stop in here because Baldwin's a pretty big hub for, at the very least, recrews. I know that, not a whole lot of action can be found here anymore, but that, and I figure this would kind of be our next check-in spot, because for the rest of the day, I'm probably just, like I said, I'm going to follow the S line back south and just see if I find anything. If I do, cool. If I don't. Locomotive sitting down there, but apart from that, not really a whole lot happening, as to kind of be expected nowadays. For the most part, pretty quiet. There's a crew van though, maybe that means something. Maybe not. I have no idea. I'm only visiting. There is a McDonald's right there though. Maybe I should go get a frappe or something. Just about had it.
L743, 18 Lee locomotive, 725, A approach, Baldwin Tower number 3, restricted 7 Clark Street number 3 into the yard. Also, Mr. Stevie Lewis, Work Authority, southbound.
Hearing a few callouts on the radio brings me up to West Oliver Street, and I just missed the lead locomotive power of L743, a daily local out of Brown Sand, Georgia, carrying primarily aggregate rock for Central Florida. They are technically crossing over the east-west line from Jacksonville into Baldwin Yard. We're just north of Baldwin Yard at what's known as Baldwin Tower. But this whole track plan here is effectively the intersection between the Tallahassee subdivision and the Callahan subdivision. To the north of the crossroads is the Callahan subdivision running north to Callahan. To the south is the Wildwood subdivision running to Wildwood, Bushnell, and Zephyr Hills. To the right is the Jacksonville Terminal subdivision, also known as the SP line. And to the left of the crossroads, we have the former Tallahassee subdivision running out towards New Orleans, sold off by CSX in 2019, now owned and operated by the Florida Gulf and Atlantic Railroad. 743 is coming straight south off the Callahan subdivision onto the Wildwood subdivision and into Baldwin Yard. They'll stop here for a crew change and possibly to work the yard. They'll sometimes pick up miscellaneous freight for points south. Some days they do, some days they don't. Did they today? Well, I couldn't tell you. I never saw these guys leave, so I had no way to know. Not long after 743 cleared, I heard some more radio talk of train IO32 leaving the Jacksonville intermodal ramp to head north. IO32's hotshot intermodal from Jacksonville ramp to North Bergen, New Jersey, often carrying Tropicana loads bound for their Jersey distribution center. Though initially I didn't really want to go for that train because I didn't want to have to go all the way over to the east side of Jacksonville to intercept, because they'll often turn to the east out of the Jacksonville ramp towards the A line to head north towards Callahan. And yes, I know this map of Jacksonville is a little bit complicated, but I'm going to be back up here in late October to chase some other intermodal trains, and I'll explain this map further when I get up here then. But as far as we're concerned today, trains that head north often leave to the south out of Jacksonville's intermodal ramp, where they can turn east or west on the SP line to head out. And although it hasn't always been this way, so I'm not exactly sure when this changed, but IO32 now actually turns to the west out of Jacksonville ramp and takes the SP line over to Baldwin to turn north. And so after then finally remembering that that's actually what they did, I knew I could go see the train fairly easily. So I got onto West Beaver Street that parallels the SP line towards Jacksonville and ran eastward a bit of a ways to the Otis Road crossing to intercept, and barely enough time to even get set up before the hotshot IO32 thundered past. All single stack or single trailers on this train, and go figure, today's the day with no Tropicanas to be found. But IO32 wastes no time. I'm not sure if it is still this way, but I've heard in the past that classification of intermodals prioritize those with lower numbers. So IO32 would have a higher priority than IO44. But the following classification numbers go all the way up to 199, and since this train is effectively O32, that gives you an idea of what kind of priority this train holds. But even disregarding all that, simply looking at what they're carrying gives you an idea of that. These UPS trailers are no joke. Any train that carries these is top priority on any dispatcher's list. Hold these up, you might not have a very good day financially or otherwise. 32 cleared me in a matter of seconds, and the only reason I was able to kind of beat them back to Baldwin was because the speed limit on Beaver Street was 60 miles an hour, and they'd have to slow down quite a bit for Baldwin as the connection from the SP line to the Callahan sub is 25 miles per hour. In another 20 miles, 32 will connect with the Nahunta sub at Callahan to turn north through Folkestone, Jessup, and onto New Jersey. And position-wise, if we look to our left, we're only about 500 feet from the spot that we had just been set up for L743 about 20 minutes ago.
Okay, 12:20, and after a little saga at Baldwin, we're running back and forth, having no time to set up for those trains, but got them anyway. And that's just about all I had in mind for Baldwin anyway. And then IO32 shows up. I forget that he comes this way and doesn't go out the A line on the east side of Jacksonville, but 'tis what it is, you know? Kind of like this whole day. So I got my frappe, and I guess it's time to start making the run south. We'll follow the S line and see if we find anything else. Well, 2.5 hours later, I'm in Bellevue now, and I've seen nothing. Radio hadn't said anything. I've actually seen a couple of track crews working in different spots between Island Grove and somewhere north up there, I forget. I didn't really pay that much attention, but yeah, we're in Bellevue and I have seen and heard nothing. So I stopped in at Sonny's and grabbed a pair of Old Reliable. That which I call a pulled pork sandwich with sides of macaroni and cheese and coleslaw. Basic, perhaps. Delicious, absolutely. Pretty soon, I'm gonna get back into very familiar territory. I mean, I'm already through Ocala, and once I get back on the road, I'll be in Wildwood in another 20 minutes. So anything I see beyond this point is gonna be pretty familiar to y'all, but it is what it is. Drove all the way to Georgia just to find out that, you know, the railroad did its thing. So sometimes that happens, and I guess that's what this video is meant to showcase in its prime example.
743 is back at Orange Heights, over.
I should be at the house by the time he gets down here. Okay, doke. All right, thank you. L753.
Dispatch Texas up.
66.
Coming back into Wildwood, I heard some talk of train L753 working the yard. That's the Wildwood local switcher that switches local customers around Wildwood as far south as Zephyr Hills and as far north as Ocala, but they were just in Wildwood Yard for today. They were asking dispatch if there was any other trains in the picture besides another one that was coming north, and the only train they knew of was L743 that had just recently left Baldwin, and their response was, "I'll probably be back at the house by the time that train gets here." And all I can say in response is, my thoughts exactly. But 753 had about 50 empty cars that were ready to go back north, having been pulled from various customers in the area very recently. And since Wildwood Yard isn't necessarily a terminal yard, and so no road trains originate or terminate at this yard, trains headed to other places must work this yard along their way to other places. So 753 was waiting for clearance onto the main line to push these 50 or so cars down about 1.5 miles to Turnpike, where they would leave them and have another northbound train pick them up within the next couple of days. Though before they could get clearance onto the main, they'd have to wait on opposing train M452 to come by. M452 is daily manifest freight out of Miami's Hialeah Rail Yard, headed back to Rice Yard in Waycross, Georgia. While 452 can be expected to contain most of South Florida's merchandise traffic, he looks more like a Bone Valley haul today than anything else. And that can be attributed to the fact that they work Winston Yard, a gateway to and from the Bone Valley, on their way north from Miami. Obviously, on top of the limited amount of South Florida merchandise they have with them today, they picked up a whole bunch of Bone Valley traffic headed north. Loaded phosphate hoppers, empty sulfur tanks, and likely by extension some Central Florida merchandise as well. But with all that together, 452 is a pretty good sized train today.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day. 772, I'm up for riding the shell on them. Good for 20. Oh, 2776.
A fairly lengthy but simple consist for 753 this afternoon: open top hoppers and covered hoppers. These primarily PMRX hoppers are for aggregate and decorative rock of varying kinds. These cars go to Conrad Yelvington, so it's very likely they just recently pulled these from the Conrad Yelvington that is literally right here. And the handful of covered hoppers near the head end are likely for varying kinds of grain. I'm not sure what kinds off the top of my head, but I know that these primarily go to industries such as Cal-Maine Foods. I have heard of them receiving feed corn for chickens in the past, and that could be what was in these cars, though nothing's in any of them now. They're all clearly empty. The two-train blitz at Wildwood was the first action that I had effectively had the entire afternoon, and after that it was just head back towards home as best we could, still following the tracks. That eventually brought me through Tampa and down onto the Palmetto subdivision, the final tracks for Bradenton. And I'd end up getting lucky just one more time.
Alright, well folks, it's just after 5 now, and I've been on the road a couple more hours, and now we're back on the Palmetto subdivision in Sun City, and by happenstance I stumbled upon L783. They're headed south with a train of an unidentified size, so let's turn around and find out what it looks like.
So yeah, I guess I've gotten just about everything I can get out of today, right? I've basically followed the tracks all the way home from Georgia. I even ran by Baldwin Yard in Tampa to see if there was anything going on there, but not even really much happening there. So got on the Palmetto sub, started following it back south, and like I said, I found 783, and they're probably going to go to Port Manatee. That's probably going to be a topic for another future video, is just how much the operations on the Palmetto subdivision in and of themselves have changed since I've been coming out here often. Just in the last year or so, there's been so many changes as to what trains serve what customers, which trains will do what now. Like 783, they don't even serve Palmetto's Conrad Yelvington anymore. So that might be something to cover eventually. But as far as all that concerns me right now, I've had a long day. I am ready to go home. I've seen a number of trains. Didn't get the one we wanted, but that's life, isn't it? I will say though that it feels good to be back, and I'll have to do something like this again at some point, because I actually did have a really nice time today, and it was something new, so
it was an experience, simply put. So I thank you guys for following along said journey for as much of it as you decided to watch, because I have no idea how long this is going to be, but it is what it is. I think that's kind of the whole motto of today anyhow, so. But thanks again for tagging along with me today, and I'll see you sometime fairly soon on the Sunshine State Rails.